Welcome to Massive Passive Cash Flow, the podcast that guides professionals to financial prosperity. Join our community and let's start building your wealth. Here's your host, Gary Wilson.
Welcome back to the Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast. I'm Gary Wilson, your host. I'm so glad to have you back on the show. We have a great guest today, Chris Long from Ottawa, Canada, one of my favorite places. Many of you know I used to live up there in Canada for 5 years and went to Ottawa on several occasions, mostly for teaching, but also for having fun. By the way, the best hamburger I ever had was in Ottawa. Was at this outdoor, like a trailer thing they pull up. This thing was massive, and it was just absolutely the best, most delicious hamburger I've ever had. So, and I did not get the fries with the I forget what they call that stuff.
Within.
Yeah, I never got used to that, man. I was like, I just felt like my arteries were going to just clog up right on the scene there. But hey, Chris, first off, dude, I appreciate you doing this, man. I know what you're doing takes a lot of time, and you're very successful. I feel lucky to have you. So thanks for doing this.
Excited to be here, Gary.
Yeah. Well, let's jump right into it. First off, if you could tell people a little bit about your background, so they understand how you got to what you're doing today, what led you to this where you are, and then it'll make sense to them. And then we can maybe jump into some of your projects.
Yeah, so I started off as a carpenter, not even as a laborer. Got lucky enough to get an apprenticeship with a great company. Took me about 6 years to become a licensed carpenter, and then immediately, as soon as I got my ticket as a carpenter, I started a construction company named after my grandfather, Conrad Construction, and I ran that for about 9 to 10 years. And two worlds kind of combined. It was construction and real estate. I always loved real estate. And I love building. I'm a builder by nature. So I was buying houses, turned them into duplexes. I was on my second one. And then as I always love real estate, I had bad tenants and I was like, oh my God, like I just can't do tenants in Canada. They just have too many rights, too much control. And then I kind of stumbled upon the opportunity at the same time of noticing that, as a contractor, I just didn't have an affordable space for all my tools and equipment for like a yard. And everything on the market is 1 acre and above, 3 to 5 year lease, triple net. And I was just a contractor coming up that just needed something small and affordable. So, I was like, you know what, I'm a simple thinking guy. I'm going to create a simple solution. And that's what I did. I started Longyards Storage, built 1 yard, at one facility, I built several yards. And then within no time, 6 weeks, I was fully leased up. So a little bit about my history, how I started Longyards, and I'm calling from Ottawa, but we're building out in Florida. We got other locations I'm excited to talk about. And excited to see where this goes.
So let's talk about the model then. Your first, tell us about the first project. I think you were telling me before the show you bought one, then you put money into it, and it's of course worth a lot more money now. People love hearing those kind of stories, and then we can talk about some of the projects in the different states, because you're going to have people reaching out for this all over the U.S. and Canada as a result.
Well, you know what? It changed my life. Like I went from an apprentice carpenter, making ends meet to being financially free living in Florida. And that's what my first deal did for me. So my first property, I bought it for $470,000. I did a traditional seller take back, got an investor behind me. I put some capital myself, $200,000 into it. I got the investor to put in $5. So in total, I was in under $1.2 million. Now this property is worth over $4 million and cash flowing over 40 grand a month, with my expenses, with my mortgage being very low, my CapEx, insurance, operating expenses, everything is just low. As low as you think it is. You're not developing the land. You're not doing anything too complicated. And that was my first deal. So, and now as a franchise, I turned into a franchisor. So we built an entire business and the SBA is backing us. So, you could actually, an investor could take down a property like this using the 10% down. And at that point in time, it would have cost $130,000 to have an asset that brings in over 40 grand a month.
Wow. So the properties you're talking about, they're basically land, and I'm gathering they're fenced in. I think usually they fence in, or you have different. Well, let's say you buy a piece of land and you break it up into 10 different rentable spots. Are they separated by fences? Are there any physical structures on there? Let's kind of unravel that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So think of like self-storage contractor yards. Right. So you think of, it's funny, my yard is quite literally a long yard. Okay. It's 200 feet by 2,000 feet. So think of a long rectangle. You have a road in the middle, and then on one side, you have all yards. On the other side, you have all yards. And when I say yards, they're fenced in compounds. So instead of a
Gotcha.
self-storage structure where you roll up the gates, the only difference is you open two gates, you roll up the door, you open two gates, and you got your own yard. It's completely fenced in with fabric. And if you want, we can add power, cameras, and what we call a long box and a long office. So
Yeah,
either the hobbyist, homeowner, or contractor has everything they need that's adaptable to their business and it's affordable, which is part of our core values at Longyards.
that's awesome. Now for the financing, you mentioned, you brought in a partner for that one? I think he put in a half,
Yeah,
500,000. Is that right?
exactly.
Okay.
So on the corporate side, we're bringing in investors. There's great returns. A lot of
Okay.
real estate guys, they understand, the cost segregation, the tax savings, they understand the cash flow, the forced depreciation, all the benefits that come with real estate. So what we're doing on the corporate side is we're taking down larger deals and we're bringing in investors to help us take down the deals and benefit on all the upside. But on the franchise side, because we got approved by SBA, SBA has great packaging and they do a 90-10 loan to value. And 90-10 loan to value is the purchase of the real estate or the lease, the
Okay.
build out, and the operating expenses. So think about the whole project until you're actually breaking even. You got to come up with 10% of that. So it's a beautiful model, something that is not available in Canada. One of the reasons I decided to go out
Right.
to the States, just so much more opportunity. But that's a little bit on the debt structures, and it's a little different for the investors.
Yeah. Okay. So now the model we're using SBA, is that where you're using for the franchise business, the franchise part of the business? Is that where
Well,
you're,
it's
yeah.
very clean. So ideally, we're doing it for both corporate and investors because it's just such a great
Okay.
lending program. There's a few challenges, and I mean, timing. People recognize the SBA takes a little bit longer, but it is very
Mhm.
beneficial. But there's a few little things where the lender needs to be 51% of a guarantor. They sign on the debt, but you can have co-guarantors. So yeah, ideally, we're using the SBA for both franchising and investing, but sometimes we'll
Gotcha.
do a seller take back. Also, there's other opportunities where we could do non-recourse debt, just requires a little bit more of a down payment. So it really depends on the asset class, the acquisition strategy. And some investors, they're just like, look, I'd rather put in a big chunk of cash. And,
Right.
we'll do that as well. So
Yeah. Now, okay. So you're really not, you're using SBA financing, and what other, if you don't mind sharing, what are their current terms and rates and things like that? I understand 90-10, um, but do they have a maximum? And then also what are the terms? And whether, because I guess they could change over time, but
yeah, well, it's great. I think it's prime plus like 2%. So it's a little bit floating. And right now we're seeing around 10%.
yeah.
But it's really great because SBA is really geared to help you get started, right? It's small business, which is what Longyards does. We support small business. And they'll do interest only in some cases up to 24 months. So you're doing
Wow.
interest only, you're getting started. They'll even give you a bit of a salary, if you're quitting your W-2 and you're kind of going into this to help you keep afloat.
Mhm.
So that's what we're seeing with SBA 10%. Now, if you go like your more conventional lending, might see like a 60-40, 65-35. And at that point, because you have a less loan to value, you might see interest rates probably even 7.5, maybe 8%. But we have the biggest thing for
Okay.
us is the debt service coverage ratio. The banks want to
Mhm.
know, when you're going to break even. And because our build out is so, first of all, build out is so minimal and the cash flow is so fast, the debt service coverage
Right.
ratio to break even is quick. And because we are a massive cash flow,
Yeah.
it's very lucrative from a cash flow perspective. It truly is. That's the number one thing about Longyards. It's cash flow. So the debt service
Yeah.
coverage ratio, banks just love it. It's very, very safe, very secure. And I mean, it's the same language as self-storage for all the reasons, except we actually have less units because they're bigger with less
Right.
expenses, but all the benefits because it's low failure rate, it's great in a recession. And then a lot of people know who run self-storage businesses know small businesses are some of the best clients because they stay the longest. And that's our
Yeah.
main clientele. So right from the lending rate to like the churn and the debt service coverage ratio, banks love us.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to emphasize for everybody listening here is, early on, Chris mentioned that in Canada, landlord tenant laws are definitely more pro tenant, and they lean towards the tenant and away from the owner. And I can vouch for it because I used to live up there. There are states in the U.S. that are going that way too. But what I'm getting at here is, when you're doing something like this, it's non-residential. It's basically commercial space. There's just not as much law on the books. There's the law is very sparse, and it's basically, you have as an owner a lot more rights with this type of property. Number one. Number two is, remember, You don't have, other than when somebody wants you to build a box for them, you don't have a physical structure. You don't have windows, doors, roofs, plumbing, electrical, HVAC. You don't have all that stuff. You don't have residential tenants that are living there, flushing toilets, and who knows what else they're doing. But it's just much easier. So the downside risk is much lower. So what I tell people, Chris, when I teach people, is we're always looking at risk and reward. But I tell people, hey, let me put that in plain terms for you. What we're looking at is really upside potential versus downside risk. Upside potential is how much can you make and how easy it is to make it. Downside risk is what are all the potential problems and headaches and taxes and legal things, all the things, compliance, liability, all that. That's the downside risk. So here you've got minimal downside risk, you've got maximum upside potential, and the greater that spread, the more likely you are to say, yes, I'll do that deal. So in any case, so Chris, if we could talk about the cash flow part of it, I want to really get people excited here. Can you give us an idea, like maybe take one of your properties, how much you have into it, capital wise, what monthly payments are on the debt, and then what you're seeing in terms of cash flow, like per unit or per foot, or how you're doing that, and then also an aggregate. I know it's a loaded question, but I think this is what people are really, if you're listening, pull over and take notes on this part. You know?
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
did a great video on this actually recently. It's called Storage Yards versus Self-Storage. And to give you an idea, the build out cost, I'll just run the comparison between the two to give listeners a depth of understanding. So to build out a self-storage facility, roughly your build cost for your structure and going vertical is around $46 a square foot. This is on a new build. And your average return is $1.60 a square foot per month. That's after your net rentable square footage and after your expenses. Oh, sorry, not including your expenses. Where on the storage yard side, my build out cost is around $1.30 a square foot, and it's around 20 cents per square foot income per month, which is annually $2.40. So when fully leased up between the two of them, the payback time is substantially faster on storage yards. And then there's a few other things that you just briefly covered that we talked about was, I always like to say boring business, exciting life. Not only mention, because going back to the tenancy a little bit, it's like we don't have roofs, we don't have all these, we don't have unknowns. I mean, it's land, it's dirt. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out or to have many fear factors in this business because you can just look at it and be like, okay, this makes sense. There's only so many things that can go wrong. Right. So your build out costs are much quicker, much less expensive. And then it goes into area specific. Obviously, if you're in a place where land is like $500,000 or $1 million an acre, that's where it becomes really difficult. So you have to be a little creative. We can do a lease model or a joint venture and partner with the landowner. And there is a world where you could do, you can still acquire those. You just have to charge more because it's all relevant in the area of which you're in. But we're seeing it still work in a lot of different markets. You just got to be very selective with the location. And, we can go into our acquisition strategies, but giving you an idea of the numbers, it's quite different on a cash flow basis. You could look at the payback return time and it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I know you mentioned early on that you're obviously in Florida operating there. And what are some of the other states that you're operating in
So right now,
or even looking at?
yeah. So we're looking at Tennessee. We're looking at a deal in Georgia, a lot in Texas, and we have other territories that are signed right now, and they're Indianapolis, Mississippi. So we're basically going everywhere. I like to stay away from the blue states if I could. When I say that, like New York, California, it's just less business friendly. But to give you an idea, though, that's where we're at right now.
Did you know that you can participate in class every Monday? We call it Monday Night Live, 7 p.m. Eastern, with me and dozens of other investor agents from around the country, in fact, the world. Every Monday, totally free. No selling, no recruiting, just straight up education on anything and everything in real estate. And we have a lot of good guests coming on once or twice a month, bringing in expertise on subjects like how to buy a house with crypto. Okay. How about them apples? What about AI? How's AI affecting our business? How about the metaverse, blockchain processing? We're already using it in title work. So come on to Monday Night Live. Be ready to take notes and ask questions because it's live and engaging, and you get to participate by asking questions and meeting others. So we'll see you there. go to realestateWithGaryWilson.com, click on the resource tab, drop down, and you'll see Monday Night Live. And in there, you can see one of the most recent classes. But more importantly, you can register for class as many as you want going up to like the end of the year, I believe. So in any case, do that. We'll see you on Monday Night Live. Look forward to meeting you in person. Take care. Yeah, you hit two of the biggies. you know, and I mean, obviously I'm American. We do the same thing. I mean, we're in the real estate business, and we have to minimize downside risk, and it's a shame because the those states suffer. I mean, I don't want to go into all the politics of it, but it's just in terms of business, in dollars and cents, we're in business. I mean, we're in business to make a profit, providing a service,
Yep.
and we have to go, where we can satisfy our investors the most. So now within those areas, let's talk about micro geography and microeconomics. So obviously Florida, you got really expensive places like Miami and Palm Beach and all that, and out in Tampa, of course. Then you got places that aren't so expensive like Jacksonville, and some of what they call along the spine, north of Orlando, going up to I-75. Um, how far away? Like obviously Orlando's still growing. Jackson, everything in Florida is still growing. How far away from the development can you be with a storage yard? Is there a rule of thumb? So because you want to be able to find a land that makes sense economically, right? And you got to be close to this, so the builder, the renters want to be there. So is there like a model you follow for that, or just a general rule of thumb?
That's a good question. So we have a specific funnel, and it starts off with the Sun Belt, like our targeted states. And it's usually a formula of one, we like to stay away from snow because snow is one of our top expenses. And it's kind of comical when you think about that, because that's, when we're driving and squeezing every dollar. And then it goes to our buy box, and our buy box has a lot of bullet points, a complete checklist of everything that we want to be identifying for a long yards. Then it goes to zoning. Then it goes to your local building requirements. And then the last one is the feasibility, which we built a feasibility tool that we can immediately analyze a property. And within a formula, we can tell you if this works or not. And it has different tiers of land, where tier 1 is like ready to go, gravelled, fence, and tier 4 is a forest. What this does is it lets us know our net rentable square footage, our cost, and timelines, which then formulates to what we say a gross rent multiplier. And then it just immediately, it's a green light or none. So we have developed an entire acquisition strategy system to really identify key properties in key areas. So that's like our internal process, because what looks simple is not easy, and we've had to build this entire business. Now people look on the outside, okay, what does that mean, right? So if it's funny, I'll explain this in two different ways. And starting with this, supply and demand. Most businesses are built on supply and demand. Okay, if you look at Longyards Storage in Ottawa and you zoom out, the first thing you'll go is like, wow, that's kind of in the middle of nowhere. And you know what? When you look at Ottawa and the density, it is far from the core, but we have a lot of great things going. We got traffic, we have growth, we have good demographics. There's a lot of good things going for Ottawa. So
and the senators,
one of my founders, Bruce Firestone, he'd love that comment. So, there's kind of like key metrics that you would think, and this is again like main artery, close to highways, good traffic, good density. But there's a lot of others that go within going deeper into the feasibility and understanding of the business model. And that's what we do. We look at a parcel, there's little nuances. The distance to the quarry. If your quarry is on the other side of town, your trucking cost for stone, your project cost is tripled. Strength of the dirt, entitlements. There's a whole layer of checklists that we go through. We make sure that we're being very thoughtful and methodical with each property. So it's not always, first of all, it's like there's a starving demand, for this product. And if you want to open up a hot dog stand, there's a great book I read, and it didn't talk about, some people focus on the color, some people focus on like the best quality hot dog, best price, but what you want to focus on is actually a starving crowd. And that's what Longyards does. So even though I am very data and process driven, at the end of the day, we have a starving crowd looking for our product.
Right. Yep. Good old fashioned supply and demand, demand is high, and so right now there probably is not a lot of supply. You're probably one of the few suppliers. But I like that. What's interesting about this is obviously I've been in real estate a lot in my life and done a lot of building where there's lots of properties, small little places to big, high rise things. And the fact that you're a carpenter, what's interesting, I can see you, all the skills and talents that you developed as a carpenter, you're actually applying to this business model. I mean, measure right, measure twice, cut once. I
Yep.
mean, that's what you're doing. You're gathering all the data. You're looking at you got a plan to follow, you got a model, and all you're doing is executing and sticking to the rules. That's one of the keys to success I see with people, Chris, is in life is the people who are the most successful are the ones who usually to maintain their high standards. They do not deviate from their plan or their model, right?
Yeah.
And the people that do usually are the ones that end up they're compromising, so they end up compromising on success as a result too. Kind of interesting. A little bit of preaching moment there for everybody, but
No, I like
you know,
that. I like to
yeah,
add that the person who walks the farthest is the person who loves walking the most. And as a builder, I built this business around builders' needs, but also as a builder and love building, I'm not in this for the
yeah,
money. I'm not in this like I'm in this to change people's lives, but I just love building as a carpenter and as a
yeah,
builder, now as a developer. So give me dirt, change it into a long yards, and that's my paycheck. So like in terms of success, when you're doing what you love, it's not even a paycheck. I'd wake up and if I had no money doing this, I'd be doing it the same thing.
yeah. Well, when you're looking at identifying property, a potential piece of property, do you use are you using like county websites and just researching, or do you have commercial agents you use that go out and look out for you and hey, just this is what I'm looking for, go find some of this, or is it a combination of things? If you don't mind sharing a little bit about that, that would give people
Yeah,
more insight
so
too.
I have a complete checklist from A to Z from how to find a location right to your grand opening. And it goes to our acquisition assembly line. And then we built out a development assembly line, a construction assembly line, and then a management SOP. And each item is a checklist with a training video on how to, with the franchise system, to completely answer all these questions. So anyone coming on board, it's like, well, where do you start? It's like literally here
Yeah,
is an assembly line. And when you start off, I mean, we have three different acquisition strategies. There's low-hanging fruit, which is on market, there's off market, and then there's future land use, which a lot of people don't think of and consider. So if
mhm,
you don't have the land, you make the land. So if you find out where the city is growing, it's agricultural, you go and you turn it into industrial. Now it's a layer deeper that you need to go into and it takes longer. However, it's a business model in itself where you're taking ag land and you're converting it, right? As long as the city's
right,
on board, the end of the day, you're going there and you're telling them two stories. Hey, we're going to pay you more taxes, which is the one they care about the most. Number two is, hey, we're going to help the small business community and you're going to help us do that. And we're aligned, which most people understand, including communities, that small business is very important to the economic growth. So our acquisition strategy starts with, it territorial, first of all, and that's what the franchise model is. If you want a long yard, by the way, we sold 6 territories in the last few weeks. People are snatching this up. So one of the first things we do is we define the territory, and then we go and we define the acquisition strategy and what they want to do. So, and like I said, the low-hanging fruit on market, off market, and the future land use. And each of those has a checklist on the property. And then we have different softwares that can help us identify it based on our checklist. Again, strength of
yeah,
soil, road access. We have a full checklist that makes sure before we even look at a land that it gets filtered to make sure it's worth looking at.
yeah. It's funny. I just was thinking about London. For people listening, London, Ontario is about 2 hours west of Toronto, and I lived there for 5 years, and that area has been growing like crazy. It used to be a farmland when I first moved there. I mean, my wife's family was 11 brothers and sisters in 6 farms, and that's all it was. It was west, north, London was all, but it's been growing, 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 expanding, 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 and it's just amazing. Have you ever looked at that area? Or I mean, I know it's probably easier in the States because of the SBA. Obviously, that's a big, big factor. But
Yeah.
for people out there, I mean, I know investors buying farmland just to sit on it because they know eventually somebody's going to build a tract home development on it.
Well, my uncle started Vailcraft, and he started off with a piece of farmland, and he bought it, sat on it, and then just started cutting it up and turning it into residential development. So,
Yeah,
long yards is a business on the real estate, but you can't do long yards without the real estate. So I've had to
yeah,
become a lot better at identifying and understanding real estate. And I thought when I got into this, I knew what I was doing, but wow, was I in for a roller coaster of a learning curve. But it
oh
is
yeah,
true. The farmland is one, and because there's such a supply and demand shortage that uh, people were willing to drive out to park their equipment or goods for their business. So,
yeah,
it's just one of the many acquisition strategies that we have, which really opens up the market opportunity. Industrial outside storage already is a $200 billion industry, but it doesn't really account into the future land use that cities are expanding to because there's so much scarcity and urgency that really is for industrial land. It's just the price per
Yeah.
acre is going up substantially because it's so scarce, it's so rare, and it's almost like
Right.
bidding wars. So people saw in COVID, putting on multiple cash offers in houses. Well, this is like industrial land in a lot of places. Once you're in this market, you're like, oh wow, this is a competitive industry. So we have to be
Yeah.
extremely sniper skill set, hyper focused. But the
Yeah.
land business, and adding on to that, it's a land banking play. When I bought my
Yeah.
land in Ottawa, I bought it for 470, but there comes a point where the land becomes worth more than the business, right? And then it's a
Right.
business decision. Well, what do I do now? Do I entitle it, or do I just sell the land, or do I just keep the cash flow going? But these are good problems to have.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about timing. And I know we're getting close on time here, but actually, when I was to speak of it, but um, two things. One of them is, you know, time wise, like what's involved here from start to finish. I know it can vary from probably a few months to even longer than a year, but also time wise as far as where we are economically. And you can see in the United States we've got a lot of massive immigration coming in. We got a shortage of homes all over the US. So it's like the demand, I think, is going to be there for some time coming. But the market can also shift, and it likely will. Mathematically it's going to happen. We just can't tell you when. But do you guys get into that type of homework at all too, or what we can tell? But first off, the time frame from doing a project, and also where we are timing wise, and what you're looking at, what you think is going to happen. And by the way, this is not a test. We're not going to say, "Hey, well, Chris Long said," we all know it's a Chris. That's not a crystal ball. We're just guessing when we try to predict the future. But we always do try to project for business planning purposes.
Yeah, well, okay, so I would answer that with first of all, I look at a deal basis, and there's a lot of economics inside. You have the area around you, you have the state, what's going on in the state, what's the migration, what's all the tax laws and benefits. So you have, on a larger level, what's happening in the US and Canada with the economy, higher interest rates, one of the biggest ones we're seeing. But I think this is driving a lot of people just to be honestly more sharp with their skill sets and seek out better opportunities. And what that brings us now, I think, to a conversation which is, again, perfectly aligned with the topic is cash flow. Because when you're looking at an asset or an investment, or you're worried about the times ahead, this brings people to want to be certain with their investment, because they've been through so much uncertainty that if anything you want to make sure is certain, it's what you're putting your time and money into. Um, and again, you don't want to buy an asset where you're negative cash flow or break even. You want to buy something that you feel like can bring in, multiple
Mhm.
cash flow and have a good debt service coverage ratio. And the way I look at it is, if you can look out 5 or 10 years, and if rents are doubling in 10 years in most asset classes, that's the best way to hedge yourself and be safe. So I'm definitely no crystal ball what's going to happen in 3 or 5 years. All I can say is, when you're looking at a lot of multifamily guys, they're getting hurt by insurance increases. The build cost for capex, a roof repair 5 years ago is a lot more than a roof repair was now. You got your climbing interest rates. So by being in a simple business model that has high cash flow, it just hedges and de-risks all
Oh
these
yeah.
uncertainties. So when people are talking about the future, I just look at the simplicity. If you're going to put your time and effort into something, what has the least amount of risk and least amount of uncertainty, and that's where I like to put my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, it's a perfect business model. I mean, you really are maximizing upside potential and minimizing downside risk. But how we probably should try to wrap this up, because I know they always tell us do it a half hour, do it a half hour, but it never works that way. But you mentioned of a video earlier, and also how can people get a hold of you? How can they learn more about this? How can they participate either for the franchise part of it, or being part of the corporate model too? Let me get my pencil here. Yep. So that's the name of the video, website, contact information, next best step, that type of thing.
Yeah. So you just go and rate on longyards.com, and then you can find out all of our information there, and you can learn more about franchising, what that looks like, or investing. Just learn more about our business model. We have a podcast link at the bottom of the website. You could just listen and learn more. We're on YouTube. Just look Longyard Storage. You can follow me on Instagram. It's Chris at Longyards. So Chris, I think it's Chris Longyards actually. But yeah, if you just want to follow our social media accounts, and you can also email me directly, clong@longyards.com, and happy to answer any questions people have.
Long at Longyards. I'll make sure this gets into the show notes too. So everybody listening, I'm going to go over this slowly here for you. Longyards.com is the website, right? Longyards.com is the website.
You got it.
Longyard Storage you can find on YouTube. Well, on YouTube, there was a video you mentioned early on. I guess it's like a high level kind of like introduction to the whole concept of it.
Well, if you follow Chris Long and just put Chris Long Longyard Storage, I believe we did a recent video and I just talk about self-storage versus storage yards. And it kind of gives people an idea of the build-out cost, timelines, debt service coverage ratio, future market value. And it kind of gives people like a level of depth to go, oh, like, wow, this is the difference between the two of them. And, I love self-storage. A lot of people in the mastermind communities, I'm not knocking self-storage. It's just different.
Right.
I mean, if you go to build a building and put a fence up, which one's quicker? And when you look at the returns, you go, which one is return faster? So I let the numbers do the talking.
Yeah. And then C Long at longyards.com is the email.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, Chris, man, I really appreciate you doing this. You gave a ton of information, and I think everybody here's got a much clearer view on what's possible for them. So if you're listening, make sure you go visit longyards.com. You can email Chris too at clong@longyards.com, the YouTube channel, Longyard Storage YouTube channel, right? And just follow that. Learn more about it. This is new to me. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And the fact that, Chris is we up there, we used to call ourselves Canucks. A lot of Americans don't know what a Canuck is. It's just what us Canadians call ourselves. But I can be both, So, but in any case, follow the model. Money follows management. And you heard it. I mean, the guy knows what the heck he's talking about. I mean, if he took all the skills and talents, applied it to this, and I'm going to learn more about it myself, and I hope you do too. So if you could, while you're online, please leave a review for the podcast. We really love your reviews. Helps keep things going. Believe it or not, your reviews don't cost you a dime. Takes a minute, but it means the world to us. So really appreciate you doing that. And thank you for participating, Chris. Thank you for listeners listening. You guys take care of yourselves. God bless you and your families. And we will see you on the next Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Massive Passive Cash Flow. Be sure to go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.